I've always been the kind of guy who's willing to sacrifice for the things I want. It's not that I'm particularly virtuous, it's more about wanting to have control, to make something of myself on my own terms. I've worked hard for everything in my life. Growing up in a small town, things were never easy. We didn't have much, but I didn't really care. I was a dreamer, and one dream in particular kept me going. I wanted a Mustang GT. It wasn't just any car. It was the car. The symbol of success, independence, and freedom. I was obsessed with it since I was a kid. My friends all had their sights on flashy stuff like the latest phones or designer clothes. Me? I wanted to drive a muscle car with a roaring engine and that deep, guttural sound when you hit the gas. The kind of car that would make heads turn, a testament to everything I had worked for. For years, I scraped by. I worked multiple jobs, waited tables, worked nights as a mechanic, and even did odd jobs for people in town. My body ached most nights, my hands were rough and calloused, and I'd come home exhausted every single day. But I kept telling myself it was worth it. Every sacrifice. Every missed opportunity to hang out with friends. Every birthday that went uncelebrated because I had to work. It was all worth it. Because one day, I'd have that Mustang. My parents didn't understand. They'd never been the type to think big. My dad was a simple man, worked at the factory, and never really aspired to much more than putting food on the table and a roof over our heads. He'd often tell me, "Don't dream too big, son. You'll be disappointed." But I didn't care. I was determined to prove him wrong. I was so close. I had saved up enough. After years of sacrifice, I was sitting on $25,000. That's when I made the decision to finally buy it. The dealership had the Mustang I wanted. The exact model, color, and all the bells and whistles. I had the cash ready to go, just waiting for the day I could drive that car off the lot, proving to everyone, especially my father, that hard work pays off. But that night, that's when everything fell apart. It was late, just a day before I planned to finalize the deal. I came home from work, exhausted, as usual, and went to check our joint bank account. It was a habit, something I did to make sure everything was in order, and I had a little extra for the car. But when I opened the app, my heart dropped. The balance? Gone. Over $30,000 had vanished in a single transfer. My parents were the only ones who had access to the account. I couldn't breathe for a moment. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what had happened. It didn't make sense. How could this be? I stormed into the living room, my hands trembling. My mother was sitting on the couch, my dad in his recliner, watching TV. "What the hell happened to the money?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. They both looked at me, like they had no idea what I was talking about. "What money?" my mom asked, feigning confusion. "The money in the joint account." I snapped, already feeling my rage bubbling up. "Where did it go?" My father stood up slowly, a look of realization crossing his face. "You don't need to worry about that, Nate. It's my money." I interrupted, the anger in my chest rising fast. "I've been working for years to make this happen, and now you've taken it?" I said. "Don't worry about it," my dad muttered, trying to brush it off. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The betrayal was too much. My hands grabbed the nearest thing, a family photo on the mantel, and I slammed it to the ground, smashing the glass. The sound echoed through the house, louder than my thoughts. "You took my money? My future?" I shouted, my voice shaking with rage. "After everything I've done, everything I've sacrificed, you do this?" My mom stood up now, trying to intervene. "Nate, calm down. You don't understand it." "I understand perfectly," I screamed, grabbing my father's prized trophy from the shelf and throwing it against the wall. It shattered into pieces. I didn't care. All I could feel was the burn of betrayal. "This is what you've done to me. You've destroyed my dream." The silence that followed my outburst was suffocating. The broken glass on the floor felt like it was mocking me, reflecting the shattered pieces of everything I had worked for. My parents just stood there, looking at me like I was the one who had lost my mind. They were completely unfazed, almost as if it didn't matter to them at all. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my hands were still shaking. But what hit me the hardest was the absence of guilt in their eyes. No remorse, no apology, just a strange, almost indifferent look, like they knew they'd gotten away with something. And then my father opened his mouth, as if he was going to try to explain. "You don't understand, Nate," he began, his voice low and dismissive. "We had no choice. Your mother's health, and everything else. We needed the money more than you did." My stomach twisted into knots. "You needed the money?" I repeated, my voice sharp, the anger still burning in me. "What about my dream, huh? What about everything I've given up? You knew how much that car meant to me." My mother's face contorted as if she were trying to empathize, but it came off as insincere. We were just trying to help ourselves, she said, her voice dripping with a kind of false sweetness. You're young, Nate. You'll understand one day. Money isn't everything. But she didn't get it. She didn't understand what I had sacrificed, what I had earned. I had worked long hours in dangerous conditions. I had lost friendships, missed out on everything that could have made life feel real because I kept telling myself it would all be worth it in the end. I was doing it for me, for my dream. And yet, here they were, taking what was rightfully mine without so much as a second thought. I turned on my heels and stormed out of the house, my fists clenched so tight that my nails dug into my palms. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, but it did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I walked for what felt like hours, trying to calm down, but every step only made the fury burn brighter. I didn't even know where I was going, just somewhere away from them, away from the place that had once been home. Eventually, I found myself sitting in my car, my old, beaten-up sedan, staring blankly at the empty street. The Mustang dealership was just a few miles away, and I knew that if I just drove there, I could fix everything. I could go in, and even if I couldn't afford the car right now, I'd figure out some way to get it. But that was the old me, the one who would have begged, pleaded, and let the whole thing slide. This time, though, I knew something had to change. The next day, I did something I'd never imagined I'd do. I went to the bank and checked the account again. The money was still gone. And I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't going to let this slide. I walked back into the house, my jaw tight, my resolve hardening. I didn't even look at my parents when I spoke. I'm leaving, I said, my voice cold and controlled. My father shot me a confused glance. What do you mean, leaving? Where are you going? I'm moving out. I can't be here anymore. For the first time, there was a flicker of concern in my father's eyes. Nate. But I was already walking toward the door. You don't get to explain. You don't get to pretend you didn't do something wrong. You've taken everything from me, and I won't let it stand. My mother's voice cut through the air, pleading. Nate, please. You're overreacting. Just stay. We'll figure it out. But I didn't stay. I walked out of that house, and I never looked back. The next few days felt like a blur of fury and disbelief. I didn't want to think about what they had done to me. I just wanted to make it right, to get my justice. I spent hours researching legal options. The civil suit, the criminal charges. I'd heard about both, but I never thought I'd be the one who'd need them. But as the days dragged on, the rage grew, and the decision was made. I was filing both civil and criminal charges. They had stolen from me, and they needed to pay. I wasn't just going to take my parents to court. No, I was going to make sure they felt the consequences. I was going to do everything I could to make their lives as miserable as they had made mine. The days after I filed the charges were surreal. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted dream where nothing was real, and everything I'd known was falling apart. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to lose everything. But what hurt more than anything was how coldly my parents reacted. They never once tried to reach out, apologize, or even act like they cared. It was as if they had already made their peace with what they'd done. I kept telling myself I was doing the right thing, that this wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. But with every passing day, the emotional weight of what I was doing grew heavier. It wasn't just the money anymore. It was the betrayal, the years of trust one had built up, only for them to rip it all down with a single selfish act. The fact that they didn't even feel guilty about it made my blood boil. I was prepared for a fight, but nothing could have prepared me for the fallout that came next. The court hearings were scheduled, and my attorney was confident we had a solid case. But the real shock came when my parents fought back in ways I didn't expect. My father, always the professional, used his connections to make the process more difficult. He had a reputation in the town, and he used it to try to discredit me. Nate's just upset. He's young and doesn't understand what it takes to provide for a family, he told anyone who would listen. It felt like a slap in the face. Here he was, the same man who had preached about hard work, about sacrificing for the family, suddenly playing the victim. It made me sick to my stomach. But what really threw me off was my mother's reaction. She became almost hysterical, showing up to the hearings, tears in her eyes, playing the role of the helpless victim who had just tried to help her son. She had the nerve to accuse me of ruining their lives, of being greedy and heartless. She cried to the court, begging them to let her keep the house and her career intact, claiming that the stress of the lawsuit was driving her to the edge. I almost couldn't believe it. These were the same people who had wiped me out, drained my account for their own benefit, and now they were acting like I was the one who had wronged them. The irony was maddening. At that point, I realized this wasn't just about the money. It was about exposing them for who they really were. I wasn't just fighting for my Mustang anymore. I was fighting for the truth to be known. The tipping point came when I found out they had started to manipulate my younger sister. I hadn't spoken to her since I moved out, but I knew she had always been close to our parents. She had been caught in their web of lies and was now standing by their side, taking their side in the dispute. I couldn't let it slide. Not after everything I had gone through. I confronted her one evening when she came to my apartment, trying to make peace, trying to convince me to drop the charges and move back in with our parents. She didn't understand why I was going so hard after them. Nate, they're your family. They're doing the best they can. You're ruining everything. You don't get it. I shot back, anger bubbling up again. They stole from me. They've stolen from me my whole life. And now they think they can get away with it. I'm not going to let them. She blinked, confused. You're being too harsh. It's just money. It's not worth all of this. I clenched my fists, trying to stay calm. It's not just the money. It's the principle. They didn't care about me. They didn't care about my dreams. All they cared about was themselves. She stood there, speechless for a moment, and then something inside her snapped. She turned and left, the door slamming behind her. I never expected her to understand, but that moment made me realize just how deep the lies ran in my family. Things started to move quickly after that. The civil lawsuit for $50,000 plus damages was filed, and the criminal charges for felony theft were officially in place. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I didn't care. I had already lost everything I thought mattered, so what did I have to lose now? The legal battles were exhausting, emotionally draining, and incredibly stressful, but I was relentless. I pushed forward with everything I had, determined to bring them to justice. Every email, every phone call, every court appearance, I gave it my all. And then, it started to happen. Slowly but surely, my parents' world began to crumble. My father's business, the one that had provided for our family, came under investigation. The charges in the civil suit had been damning enough, but when the criminal case escalated, it was like a chain reaction. His company was forced to let him go. The clients he had built his career around started pulling away. They didn't want to be associated with someone accused of stealing from his own son. My mother's business didn't fare any better. She was a successful real estate agent, known for her impeccable reputation and her ability to close big deals. But when word got out about the charges, clients started pulling out of deals left and right. Her phone stopped ringing. She lost commission after commission, until she was no longer the successful agent she used to be. Then, the house was seized. The one they had always been so proud of, the one that had always symbolized their success, was taken by the bank. It was a cruel, bitter blow for them, but one that they had earned. The moment the house was seized, something inside me broke. Not in the way you'd think. It wasn't satisfaction or revenge, it was the realization that everything I had fought for had worked. But the victory came with a heavy price. I hadn't just destroyed my parents' lives, I had obliterated everything they had built. The once strong facade of a perfect family was now shattered beyond recognition, and in its place stood a hollow, broken version of who they once were. I stood outside their house the day it was taken. The sheriff's deputies were there, piling up their belongings into boxes, taking everything they could carry. My mother stood in the driveway, clutching her purse like a lifeline, tears streaming down her face as she begged for mercy. She pleaded with the deputies, with anyone who would listen, but no one could help her. Not anymore. My father, on the other hand, sat in his car, staring straight ahead, not even bothering to try and fight back. His eyes were empty, void of the usual arrogance. It was as if he had already resigned himself to losing everything. I watched from across the street, standing in the shadows, my arms crossed. It felt surreal. My parents, who had always been so certain that they were untouchable, were now nothing more than a cautionary tale for everyone in town. Their reputation was in tatters, and it wasn't long before the town gossip spread like wildfire. I hadn't heard from my sister in days, and it wasn't until I received a call from her that I realized just how deep the damage had gone. "Are you happy now?" she asked, her voice shaking with anger and hurt. "You've destroyed them, Nate. You've destroyed our family. What the hell is wrong with you?" I could hear the desperation in her voice, the sense of betrayal. She didn't understand. She still didn't get it. She didn't see the years of manipulation, the lies, and the financial abuse that had been a part of my life since I could remember. To her, it was all about loyalty, about family. But what she failed to realize was that family had already failed me long before I filed those charges. "You don't get it," I said, my voice tight with frustration. "This isn't about you or me. This is about them. They took from me. They took everything I worked for, and now they have to pay." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and then she spoke again, her voice softer this time. "You've really crossed a line, Nate. I can't be a part of this." And just like that, she was gone. I didn't hear from her again, and in a way, it felt like another betrayal. She was so wrapped up in the idea of family loyalty that she couldn't see the truth. The reality was that she, too, had been a victim of their manipulation. But I wasn't about to back down now. The legal battle continued, and with each passing day, it felt like more and more of my parents' life crumbled under the weight of their actions. But it wasn't just them who suffered. My Aunt Patricia, the one person who had always stood by them, began to lose her social standing as well. She had always been part of the upper crust of town, the kind of woman who hosted lavish parties and had the best connections. But when word got out about my parents, the truth about what they had done, Patricia found herself ostracized from her social circle. I watched as the tables turned. The people who had once revered my parents were now talking behind their backs. Former friends and colleagues, who had always adored them, now turned their backs. It was like a house of cards, and everything had come crashing down. My parents weren't just losing money and reputation, they were losing everything. Their social status, their friends, their career, none of it mattered anymore. The truth had come to light, and they were left with nothing but the consequences of their actions. And then came the final blow. A few weeks later, I received a call from the dealership I had been eyeing. The Mustang GT, the one I had dreamed about for years, was available, and it was mine for the taking. The money I had saved, the settlement from the lawsuit, and the feeling of having one, it was all finally coming together. I was about to do something I had spent my whole life working toward. I drove to the dealership the next day, the same one I had dreamed about for so long. As I walked onto the lot, my heart pounded with anticipation. There it was, gleaming in the sun, the car I had always wanted. The sales guy greeted me, but I barely heard him. All I could think about was that moment, the culmination of everything I had fought for. "Is this the one?" he asked, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I nodded. "It's perfect." I paid in cash. The dealership didn't even bat an eye. The keys were handed to me, and the moment I slid into the driver's seat, it was like all the pain, all the years of sacrifice, had been worth it. The engine roared to life as I started it up, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The first drive was a blur. The wind in my hair, the power of the car beneath me, it was everything I had ever wanted. I could feel the weight of everything that had happened behind me, but in that moment, none of it mattered. This was my victory. My redemption. It wasn't long before my parents realized just how badly things had gone. The reality of their actions hit them harder than anything I could have done. The public shame, the financial collapse, the loss of everything they had worked for, it all came crashing down on them like a ton of bricks. But it wasn't until I received a call from my father that I truly understood the extent of their desperation. "Nate, I need to talk to you." His voice was shaky, almost pleading. I felt a momentary flicker of something deep inside me, a sense of what could have been, of the father I used to look up to. But then, I remembered everything. The lies, the theft, the betrayal. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me again. "What's there to talk about?" I asked, my tone cold, detached. "We're not asking for you to drop the charges, Nate," he said, his words faltering. "But you could at least help us. You could." No, I cut him off. "You don't get to ask for help. You don't get to act like everything is fine just because you're losing everything you took from me. And now you'll deal with the consequences." There was a long pause on the other end. My father's breathing became heavier, and I could tell he was struggling to find the right words. "We were trying to survive, Nate. We didn't know how bad it would get." "You didn't care how bad it would get for me," I spat back. "I've been your pawn my whole life, doing what you wanted, working hard to make you proud. And you took advantage of me. I'm done." I hung up the phone before he could say anything else. The silence that followed felt final. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about cutting ties. They had never cared about me in the way that mattered, and they never would. But even after everything, they didn't stop. They tried reaching out to me through other means. My mother sent letters, long, tear-filled pleas begging for forgiveness. "We're sorry, Nate. Please come back. We need you." I never responded. I couldn't. The man I once thought my father was didn't exist anymore. And the mother I had tried so hard to protect was nothing more than a shadow of the woman I had once loved. They had both chosen their path, and now it was too late. Meanwhile, the legal battles raged on. The criminal charges for felony theft were still pending, and the civil case was dragging through the courts. But everything they tried to salvage from their lives was falling apart. The bank seized their SUV, the last piece of their former life, and it was auctioned off for a fraction of its value. Their reputation, once untouchable, was now a joke. People whispered behind their backs, avoided them in the grocery store, and distanced themselves from them in social settings. But the fallout wasn't just affecting my parents. My sister's life was beginning to unravel too. After taking their side in the beginning, she found herself alienated from her friends, the ones who had once supported her through thick and thin. They had seen the truth, and they turned their backs on her, just as they had done to my parents. She was left with nothing, no friends, no support system. Her job was miserable, and it wasn't long before she moved away, trying to start over in a town far from home. But the damage had been done. She was as lost as they were, and she never once reached out to me after that night we fought. My Aunt Patricia, the one person who had always stood by my parents, found herself ostracized as well. The social circles that had once adored her now turned their backs, unable to ignore the scandal that had ruined everything. She had always prided herself on being the matriarch of the family, the one with the connections and influence. But now, she was nothing more than another casualty of my parents' downfall. I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for her. She had chosen to stand with the people who had wronged me, and now she was reaping the consequences of that decision. But as I watched their lives implode, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finally letting go. It wasn't just about the Mustang, or the money, or the court cases. It was about reclaiming my life, about choosing my own path. And as I drove that Mustang down the open road, feeling the power of the engine beneath me, I realized that I had finally won on my terms, and with no one to answer to but myself. The road ahead was mine to shape, and nothing and no one could take that from me. The day of the final court hearing felt surreal. All the months of pain, stress, and anger had built up to this moment, and now it was finally time to settle everything. I was sitting in the courtroom, my attorney by my side, when I caught a glimpse of my parents. They sat across the room, looking small and defeated, their faces drawn with exhaustion. They were nothing like the people I had known growing up, the ones who seemed to think they could get away with anything, that they were above reproach. Now, they looked like shadows of themselves, beaten down by the very world they had once thought they could control. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. It was almost too much to bear, the weight of the decision that was about to be made. But I had made up my mind long ago. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the principle, about making sure they knew there were consequences for their actions. I wasn't going to let them walk away from this unscathed. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't hesitate. I stood, my heart pounding in my chest, and faced the judge. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady but filled with all the rage and pain I had carried for so long. "This isn't just about the money. It's about what my parents have taken from me. They've stolen years of my life, years that I can never get back. I worked hard for everything I had. I worked myself into the ground, and for what? For them to take it all away without a second thought." I paused, collecting my thoughts. The words felt like they were clawing their way out of me, as if this was the final catharsis I had been waiting for. They didn't just steal money. They stole my trust. They stole my belief in family. And that's something I can't get back. No matter what they say, no matter how many tears they shed, they don't get to pretend that none of this happened. They don't get to pretend that everything will be okay just because they're family. Family is earned, not demanded. I sat down, the weight of my words hanging in the air, and for a moment, the courtroom was silent. My parents didn't look at me, their heads down, unable to meet my eyes. And that's when I knew I had won. They had nothing left. They were broken. And I was finally free. The judge ruled in my favor. The civil suit for $50,000 plus damages was granted, and the criminal charges for felony theft were upheld. It was a victory, but not one that I could truly enjoy. There was no satisfaction in watching them crumble. I had already won what I needed most, the Mustang, my independence, and the life I had always dreamed of. What more could I take from them? The months that followed felt like a slow recovery, a process of rebuilding my life without the toxic weight of my family dragging me down. I took the money from the lawsuit and used it to pay off any debts I had, invest in a new future, and, most importantly, buy the Mustang. That first drive, the wind in my hair, the power of the engine beneath me, it was everything I had worked for. It was more than just a car. It was my symbol of independence, of strength, of proving that I could stand on my own 2 feet, despite everything I had been through. I didn't hear from my parents again for a long time. They tried to reach out, sending messages, begging for forgiveness. But I wasn't interested in their apologies. They had made their choice, and now they had to live with it. There was no place for them in my life anymore. One day, about 6 months later, I was driving through the same small town where I had grown up when I saw them. My parents, sitting on the curb outside what used to be their house, looking lost and broken. They looked up as I drove by, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. But I didn't stop. I didn't wave. I didn't acknowledge them in any way. They were no longer my family. They had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. As I drove away, I felt the freedom in my chest, freedom that I had earned. The Mustang roared beneath me as I pushed the accelerator, the wind rushing through my hair, and in that moment, I felt untouchable. No one could take this from me. No one could break me. It was finally over. And I was free.